We have a jam-packed talk. Tracy and I have gone over this a couple of times, and we're not sure we'll be able to fit everything into an hour. That's our goal. We'll probably go over with the Q&A. So we will stay on as long as people want, and feel free to leave whenever you need to. But I did want to preface the talk really quickly with just a little quick sentence or two about the Clean Water Act. So the Clean Water Act was a pivotal, incredible piece of legislation that passed in 1972. As anyone from Maine should be proud, Senator Muskie was took the lead on that bill. It took him years and years and years to get it through, but it was an incredible bipartisan bill that got passed. So 1972, if you reflect back, let's see, there's two pictures on the right are from Maine. So that's two pictures of the Androscoggin River that was, as you all know, as many of you would know, full of effluent. And there was a song back when I was a kid about the foamy Androscoggin, and that was referring to foam as in pollutant, foaming from pollutants. So I remember it. I remember it well. And then the picture on the left is the Cuyahoga River in Ohio, which is the one that caught fire back in 1970, 69, 70, early, right before the Clean Water Act passed. And it was really an event that spawned a lot of activism and really helped get the Clean Water Act passed. So I just want to link, the Clean Water Act is the theme for our conference this year. It's the 50th anniversary of the act. I should have said that at the beginning, but so I just wanted to connect the Clean Water Act to loons very briefly. We'll keep delving into the Clean Water Act throughout the series of webinars, but really the Clean Water Act was responsible for giving the EPA a lot of authority to implement pollution control programs, to regulate discharges, to prohibit discharges of pollutants into navigable waters, and all of these things benefit loons. Loons need clean, clear water to see, to catch their prey, and fish, of course, need clean water to live. And there's lots of stories about fish coming back to sections of rivers, including the Cuyahoga as a result of cleanup post Clean Water Act. And then the other thing relevant for today and the tie into the Clean Water Act is that the regulation of pollution and oil spills was included in the original Clean Water Act, and then it spawned eventually the 1990 Oil Pollution Act, which did a lot of different things, but, and I won't go into them, I'll just say that the Clean Water Act and Oil Pollution Act led us to where we are today, which is where people who spill oil are responsible for cleanup and fixing damages, natural resource damages that have been done. And that's really what this project is about. So like I said, we're really packed for time. It's going to be tight on time. So I think I'm already over my time limit for the introduction, but so without further ado, I'll just mention this slide. I'll just introduce quickly. Tracy Hart is from Maine Audubon. She's a conservation biologist there and leads the Maine Loon Project. And I'm Susan Gallo. I'm the executive director of Maine Lakes, and I used to lead the Maine Loon Project, but it is in very good hands now with Tracy, and I am now with Maine Lakes. So Tracy, I'll stop sharing my screen. You can share yours. All right, so the way this talk is going to go, I'll do a little bit of natural history and a little bit about the threats facing loons, and then I'll pass it over to Tracy, and she'll really dig into the details of the Maine Loon Restoration Project and how it's funded, how the funding came to be, and what the project's going to look like. So next slide, just quick overview. The formal title of the project is a comprehensive approach by Maine partners to restore common loon losses resulting from the B-120 oil spill. So we'll talk about the oil spill in a little bit, but basically our goal is over the next 5 years is to increase productivity of loons, and that mainly by floating artificial rafts on territories where loon productivity is low, And then we also want to decrease mortality. So we have some outreach programming, including beefing up our fish lead free initiative, which has been going on for quite a long time, but putting more effort into that, and also creating a Loon Ranger program where we're going to be asking people, looking for volunteers to go out and help increase awareness of loons, which we hope will in turn help reduce disturbance at nests and increase productivity. And then those are the partners that we're working with across the bottom. So Maine Audubon leads the project and is the lead grantee, I guess. And then Maine Lakes, the Penobscot Indian Nation, and Lakes Environmental over in Bridgeton, we're all contracting with Maine Audubon and then working on all of this together to make it happen. So, but to set you up for this project, I'll just run through a few quick natural history bits. So next slide. So a couple things to know is that loons are territorial birds. So they establish breeding territories about, well, from anywhere from 20 to 200 acres in size, average probably around 100. When the males come back, they come back to our Maine lakes right around ice out, and the females follow shortly after. And loons compete for their territory. So you can see that amazing photo in the middle there. Those are two loons, probably two males, having an altercation over a territorial border. So really important to remember that loons need their territory. They fight to keep others out of their territories. And really lakes are finite in the number of territories that they can support. So really important when we're thinking about artificial rafts is they need to fit in with the existing loons and loon territories on a lake. And Tracy will talk more about sort of the downside and why we really have to strongly discourage putting them out anywhere, because it really matters. These territories matter, and this kind of disruption, this kind of fighting really detracts from loon productivity. So the next slide. Just want to lead into loon nesting by talking quickly about their feet and their legs. It's one of the most interesting features, I think, is the size of their legs. I mean, the size of their feet, they're really big. And then they're located way back on the back of the body. So that makes them very good swimmers. They're very good at catching fish, maneuvering through the water. But next slide. That also makes them really awkward on land. So if you've ever seen a loon walk on land, you know they sort of lurch along one step at a time, and it's really a lot of work to hold up all that muscle that they have for flight on their breastbone. So, you know, a loon in Maine can weigh up to 15 pounds. So that's a lot of weight to hold up on those legs. And so next slide. That is one of the reasons they nest where they do. So they nest right along the shoreline, so they can slip on and off the nest without being detected. So really important in that they nest in a place where they can just, any sign of trouble, any sign of predator, they can just go on and off without being noticed. A few other quick things, natural history wise. Certainly loons are all in on chick rearing. So some animal parents don't have to raise their chicks, they just have them or raise their young. They can have them and abandon them, but not so with loons. Loons, chicks are entirely dependent on their parents. And so loon parents invest a lot of energy into their chicks. They keep them on their backs. It's one of their most endearing behaviors, I think, keeping those chicks safe on their backs. And then next slide. And they also spend an incredible amount of time feeding their chicks. So both parents really work pretty much full time retrieving, fishing and finding fish and bringing them to their young. So this just makes them, and I mention this because it puts them in a vulnerable place because they're out on the water. They basically have to be out in the open water fishing all the time for those chicks. So they're, it's not like they can go, you know, sort of hide out someplace when the lake is really busy and full of, you know, racing boats and all those other things. They really have to be out there catching fish because they have to feed these chicks nonstop. So just to, oh, and one more thing, migration. Another natural history piece that ties into this project is loon migration. So loons, we all think of loons as freshwater birds because that's why most of us see them in the summertime, but they really are, they spend their winters on salt water. So they really face threats both on, they have a double threats. They have threats on their freshwater, on our lakes and ponds, and then they face additional threats on the ocean. So this is just a graphic from BRI that shows some migration, migration paths that have been recorded. So the dots and the dotted lines are the individual paths of tracked loons. And you can see that that Maine loons are spending their Maine winters pretty concentrated on the southern coast there, and down into Massachusetts, maybe as far as Long Island. I don't think that's generally the most south we think our Maine loons go. So if the map was zoomed out, you'd see loons wintering all along the coast, all the way down to Florida and into the Gulf of Mexico. But our loons, they're hardy like us, who are here in the winter, and they stay up pretty north. So just that was a quick summary of the natural history features of loons that I think all that will, I hope, tie into this project, and you'll understand why I went over those pieces of information relating to their natural history. But I'll just really quickly run through. I think I am staying on time for this part. I am going to just run through some threats to loons that they face on Maine's waters. So flooding and stranding are definitely big issues, especially where there are dams, where folks are managing lake levels, or sometimes with big rain events or big drought events. You could have these things can happen too, but flooding, because those nests are right near the shore, the lake loon nests can flood. So the picture on the left there is from the Adirondacks, and there's that nest is fully submerged, and those eggs are not gonna make it. And then the opposite, that's one problem, and then the other extreme is on the right with that's a loon nest with the marks from where a loon has dragged its belly off and on the nest. So I mentioned they have to really sneak on and off quickly and quietly without being seen. A loon that's going to, push itself over the mud like that is going to easily be noticed by predators. So that loon nest isn't going to make it. And then at the bottom, I mentioned wakes. We do have a 200-foot no wake safety boating zone in Maine, where boats within 200 feet of shore should be not creating a wake, should be going at headway speed so they don't create a wake. And there's always ongoing issues, and this picture in the bottom is from the Keezer Lake Watershed Association, and that it's not I couldn't blow it up too much, but that structure you see on the right, towards the right, where the foamy bits of the wave are, that's a floating loon raft that is clearly being just imagine if you were in a nest, you were an egg in a platform like that, and you were tipping at 45-degree angles, you're not likely to stay put. So an ongoing issue for a number of reasons. Loon productivity is one of them, but also safety and property damage and erosion. There's lots of issues with wakes in Maine, but wakes in particular for loons are a big threat. More threats to loons include, on the next slide, I think, is predators. So top left, you can see a bear eating loon eggs. I don't know of any records of this happening in Maine, but I thought it was such a cool picture. That's in the Adirondacks. But we do have eagle predation is definitely a problem. Well, I shouldn't say problem, it definitely happens. Eagles and loons overlap throughout their range, and loons learn to deal with eagles, and that's exactly what this loon is doing here. You can see on this nest cam capturing this eagle that's clearly trying to take eggs from that nest. Mink are definitely a common predator for loon eggs, and then snapping turtles and big fish are definitely big predators as well. And there's more threats. These birds face a lot of threats. Disturbance and collisions are also, boat collisions are also big issues. So just being nearby loons, knowingly or unknowingly, can stress them. Boats lingering. You know, everybody likes to watch loons. We always encourage people to watch with binoculars, but as much as you can, you know, giving them space. Loon boat strikes are one of the, maybe taking over from lead sinkers as a leading cause of death in Maine these days. So blunt trauma, when we collect dead loons and try to figure out why they die, blunt trauma is one of the leading causes, and the logical cause of blunt trauma is from boat collisions. So ongoing issues there. Next slide. Oh, and I just put this in here just to remind everybody that non-motorized boats can be just as problematic. So this is an extreme example of this poor loon in the Adirondacks. It's clearly not having a good time. I'm sure it's stress, and that's a lot of people very close to it. So that kind of disturbance is equally can be as much a problem as motorboats or speeding boats. A few more. I think in the interest of time, we just put a bunch together on these slides. These last couple slides I have for you, but habitat loss, you know, when loons lose their nesting place. Lead poisoning is an ongoing, has been the leading cause of death for adult loons for many decades. And you can see in the bottom right photo, that red arrow points to a lead sinker in the gizzard of a loon. Entanglement, the center photo, I know Tracy does, and I used to we get calls every summer of loons tangled in fishing line, often to the point where they can't open their bills, and it's very difficult to catch loons in the summer unless they have chicks. You know, really hard to rescue a bird like that. Heat, climate change is a big issue these days. In particular, and climate change really exacerbates a lot of the problems and the threats that loons have. So heat stress on the right, that loon is panting because it's warm. The water temperatures are getting warmer. And then on the left, there's parasites and diseases. Mosquito-borne diseases are growing for loons as the conditions change for mosquitoes. And of course, water quality degradation. So when loons lose that clean, clear water, they have a much harder time fishing. So with that, I think, oh yeah, one more big one that will lead me to pass this on now to Tracy is oil spills. So, and that in the top right there, you can see an oiled bird, and that's what's led to the current project that's underway. So with that, I'll pass it on to you, Tracy.
Great. Well, thanks, Susan. And hi, everyone. It's really nice to see so many familiar names on the call. So yeah, so Susan's gone over some of the threats that loons face, both on their breeding grounds and their wintering grounds in the ocean, and some things about loons that make them really vulnerable to these threats. So the last one she mentioned, so the threat of oil spills, is what led to this project, the Maine Loon Restoration Project that Maine Lakes is a part of, also Lakes Environmental Association, Penobscot Nation, and Maine Audubon as the lead. So one spill in particular is responsible for this project, and it's called the Bouchard B120 oil spill, and that's named after the barge that spilled the oil. So it occurred way back April 27th in 2003, and in Buzzards Bay, which encompasses shorelines of Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And note that since this happened in April, this is the time when many loons are moving up north to their breeding areas, but you still can capture some loons that are on their wintering grounds. You can capture some of these that might have been moving up, and there are also juveniles still in that area that spend several years on the ocean until they're ready to go up and start defending territories. So this is happening in April. It was a time when it could catch several, quite a few different loons. So what happened from the spill, this boat right here that you can see, this barge called Bouchard B120, it hit a rock and ended up gouging a hole, about a 12-foot hole in the hull, and that spilled 98,000 gallons of oil. You can see that they had some berms here, these which were trying to contain the oil, but still ended up affecting about 100 miles of shoreline, and close to 500 dead water birds were collected, representing over 30 different species. And if you think about it, the number of birds collected is much less than the total number of birds that were killed and affected by the spill. The actual totals were much higher than that. As for common loons, 76 of those that were collected dead, and then there were another 128 oil loons that were collected, and very few of those survived. And there continued to be oil loons that were found throughout the summer, and at least one of those was directly from Maine. But again, the ones collected and found don't represent all of the loons that were affected. So there's an estimation that 531 common loon deaths are attributed to this. And if you think about that these loons never had chicks, that toll on the population is even higher than that. So this spill affected loons that breed on lakes in northern New England, including Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont, and also New York. And I should mention too that it's not just common loons. So red-throated loons were also killed in high numbers. They don't breed on Maine's freshwater lakes. So I don't have a slide about them specifically. And this project is focused on common loons because of their breeding in Maine. Okay, so now 18 years later, so this happened back in 2003. 18 years later, in 2021, there was a settlement that was reached with the company that was responsible for the spill. And that was through a program that's aimed at recovering the losses and damages from spills, and it's called the Natural Resource Damage Assessment and Restoration Program, so NRDAR. So it's a pretty long one, but what it does is it, through the settlement funds, some money became available for loon restoration in the form of grants that the United States Fish and Wildlife Service administers. And some of those grants are focused on restoring loons in on their breeding lakes. And that's where Maine comes in. So Maine was funded, the Maine Loon Restoration Project was funded for 5 years when the project goes through 2026. In Maine, the Biodiversity Research Institute was also funded to do some raft work with tribes in down east and northern Maine, and also the Adirondack Center for Loon Conservation in New York, Vermont Center for Eco Studies, and the Loon Preservation Committee in New Hampshire. So we have a good representation of states and organizations who are trying to restore the loons that were lost from the V120 spill. On our project, again, just to mention, again, the partners, it's Maine Audubon and Maine Lakes who are on the call today, and then also Lakes Environmental Association and the Penobscot Nation. And I should say that the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife is also, partnering with us on several of the programs that we're working on and have been a great help. Okay, so what is the Maine Loon Restoration Project? As Susan mentioned, it's really to replace the loon lives that were lost by the oil spill in two main ways. We want to increase the loon productivity, and primarily by increasing their nesting success, and then also decrease loon mortality. And so our take on it is to engage local volunteers to accomplish these goals. And there are four main aspects that we want to engage volunteers, like hopefully many of you, in this project. So one is placing rafts or artificial nests where appropriate. Two is monitoring the productivity of those rafts. So how well do those rafts do? And then expanding our fish lead free program. So Susan had shown that picture of the X-ray with the sinker, the lead sinker in the gut. So we want to expand that program because it continues to be a source of mortality for loons. And then the last one is launching a Loon Rangers program. So this one is really trying to get volunteers involved in reducing disturbance to loons and decreasing death by boat strikes. So I can go over what that program involves. soon. But the first one, I'm going to focus on a lot on the rafts, and then we'll go into some of the other projects a little bit as well. But the first one is the Loon Raft program. So our goal here, we're going to be placing about 100 rafts with the help of volunteers over the next 5 years. And the intent is to increase the number of chicks that are hatched by loon pairs that tend to fail or have low nesting success. So I'll get to this a bit more soon, but I really want to emphasize that part about using rafts for loons that have low nesting success. So that'll make some more sense soon. Okay. Yeah, so a question I get asked a lot is, do loon nesting rafts work? And the answer is a resounding yes, but with conditions. So the rafts have been used for over 50 years and have been a great tool in increasing the production of chicks. But rafts have to be used correctly in the right places and the right situations, or they actually can end up hurting a pair's chances of producing chicks. So throwing a raft out isn't a good idea unless you know enough about loon history and have some important knowledge about the lake to know that it's going to be something that can actually help improve instead of hurt the productivity on your lake. So also, it's also important to know that loons aren't 100% successful all the time. And just because they don't hatch chicks every year, it doesn't necessarily mean they need our help. So we have kind of a rule of thumb for this project that if a pair successfully raises a chick at least once every 3 years, then they probably don't need our help with rafts. And so, why not just put out a raft? And that's because rafts come with a lot of risks. So they can do a lot of good, but they can make, like up in the left-hand corner here, they can make nests more visible to bird predators, so eagles and gulls, crows, ravens. Also on the top right, loons prefer to nest on islands. And so a raft island can attract intruders, and then a lot of the energy that would be spent nesting is spent on defending a nest or trying to protect chicks. And then also, if you end up putting that raft in the wrong place and it's really close to the border of another pair's territory, then it can result in a lot of disputes and aggression. And Susan went over what some of the consequences of that aggression can be. Also, this is showing, the one on the lower left is showing a duck that's on a natural nest, but rafts can be used by other animals. And some of those animals can even damage the raft, such as muskrats that can chew on the raft. And then rafts can also be placed in the way of boat traffic and wakes, and that can affect the productivity of that nest. And there are other things too, like chicks can get caught in the wire sometimes. Rafts have been known to sink and to flood, and they've broken loose. So a lot can go wrong with a raft. And I'm sure some of you have heard success stories and failure stories when it comes to rafts. So then the question is, so if they're a really useful tool in some cases, but they have come with a lot of risks, how do you weigh that out? So when do those benefits outweigh the risks? And so there are really 4 situations that should apply before you consider a raft on your lake. The first one is that it should be a place where there's a pair already, a resident pair that's repeatedly nested and then failed over and over again. So you shouldn't really consider a raft if the pair hasn't failed, at least for about the last 3 years or for the last 3 out of 5 years. It can be tough sometimes to know if a nest has failed and to know how well a pair is doing. So I put a couple clues there that can help you determine if a pair is actually successful or not. So of course, if you see a pair abandon the nest and never come back, then that's a sign of failure. You might hear something in the night and that indicates predation, or you might see holes in eggs if you're looking with binoculars. That can be a sign of predation, or crushed eggs. Sometimes people find broken and floating eggs. And then another one is you've seen 2 loons clearly interacting over weeks. They're doing courtship behaviors, and they're also defending their territory from other loons. But you never, after all of that, you never see any chicks. So those can all be signs that a nest has failed. You also want to only put in a raft if the reason for that failure, that nest failure, is due to a problem that a raft can address. So it can't address all problems, or only certain things. So one of those things that it can address is a problem with water level changes, so fluctuating water levels. So if there are dams and water level management changes, it might flood the nest. Sometimes even beavers can change water levels and flood the nest. And so as lake levels rise and fall, nests can be flooded or they can be stranded. So rafts, because they float, they can help with fluctuating water levels and get the nest out of the way of that flooding, and so it can rise and fall with the waves, with the wakes, and with the rising levels. And in fact, rafts have been most successful on lakes that have dams, where there aren't, and especially if there aren't any other suitable nesting sites. So it really gives them a place to nest when they've lost their normal nesting site. Okay, another time that the thing that that rafts can help to address is land animal predation. So if a nest consistently fails because there are land animals like raccoons and skunks and even dogs that are taking eggs from the nest, then you might be able to get the nest offshore a bit and away from those predators and offer some protection by using a raft. But I should note that they don't work as well for avian predators, and actually can make them more visible to avian predators. So if eagles are the main problem, a raft is not your answer. There are avian guards you can put up on a raft, so you don't necessarily have to avoid a raft if all the other things seem to check out. But if eagles are your main issue, that's not what a raft isn't what you want. And then also rafts can help address habitat loss and shoreline disturbance. So if a loon's regularly disturbed, it might abandon its nests, or if it's near a place like this beach here that you can see in the lower left, that type of disturbance could cause it to leave its nest. So a raft can help, again, get that away from human intrusion by getting it off the shore. Also, lakeshore development and habitat loss. So loons can lose their prime nesting habitat, and it can force them to nest in poorer sites like this swim raft right here. The eggs that they laid did not make it last year, and they might not nest at all. So again, a raft might be able to help address that lack of habitat. Okay, and so first you have that there's a failing pair. They fail to hatch chicks. There is a problem. It's caused by a problem that a raft can address. And then there's a suitable site that would work for a raft. So a raft has to be in a place that won't put loons in harm's way. So it can, in a sheltered spot, it has to be within the pair's territory without attracting additional pairs. So you'll probably need to know the rough boundaries of a territory before thinking about a raft. And protected from wind. Prevailing winds shouldn't be hitting the raft, away from human disturbance. And they want to be able to swim on and off the raft. So even at the lake's lowest level, you want it to be deep enough so that the raft can float and loons can get on and off. And then maybe the most important thing for a raft is that, especially on a project where we're working with volunteers to maintain the raft program, is to have a committed group who's willing to take this on. Rafts are a lot of fun, but they require a lot of monitoring and maintenance. So you have to be ready to be involved and committed for the long term. So you have to take them out every fall and return them back to the lake in the spring, as pretty close to ice out as possible, or at least before nesting has begun, 1 to 2 weeks before nesting has begun. They also, you have to make sure the rafts stay anchored and that they don't have to be moved if the water levels changed. And you want to make sure they're in good condition. So we do weekly monitoring to see how successful they are and to see what condition they're in. So there's a fair amount that's involved. This is one volunteer here who was towing out a raft that he had created. Okay, so here's just kind of a summary of all those things. So if all these apply, if you have a pair that fails to hatch chicks and there's a problem that the raft can address, like fluctuating water levels and land predators and habitat loss and disturbance. And if there's a suitable location and a committed group, then you might be a good candidate for this program. So we're not working all throughout Maine for the Raft program. We have priorities in 11 different counties. And again, if you're in Washington County or more northern Maine, the Biodiversity Research Institute is working with tribes, and you might contact them to see if you might be able to work with them on rafts in those counties as well. And so if a little bit more about what's involved in the raft. So it's a year-round thing in some ways. So if you decided to sign up for this, you'd be building a raft with us pretty soon, and then deploying it as soon as possible after ice out. And then getting into the summer, April through July, we'd be asking you to monitor that pair in the raft weekly, or at least once every 2 weeks. Then you get into August in the fall, and you continue to monitor until the chicks leave the lake, or at least until they're 6 weeks old. You want to retrieve the raft and then also report all the data in your season summary. And then you repeat that again the next year and keep trying. So that's kind of what's involved. But there's one more question too, is if you can be considering a raft, and all those things might apply, but there might also be a better option than a raft, or another program that could go along with a raft. And so some of those could be outreach to lake users, or it could be fish-led free activities. And so I'll go a little bit into those. So the outreach, we are going to be starting a Loon Rangers program. It's going to launch fully next year, but this year we'll be having some pieces of it. We have signs available. The yellow ones on the left are look out for loon signs, and they're just general signs that can go out on boat ramps to start informing people that there are loons nesting on the lake, that there are problems like lead tackle that can affect loons. And so it's just a general informational sign that can go up. We also have been working with the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife on these loon nesting signs. So there are reasons not to put signs out. They can definitely make rafts more visible. It can make nests more visible, but there are places where these signs can be really useful. So there's actually a study in Vermont on nests where there was a really high risk of nest failure from human intrusion. These signs increased nesting success from 50% up to 80%. So it's quite a boost if they're used in the right way. But so they should only go in places that would attract attention no matter what. It's right out there and people are going to see that nest, or in places where the nests aren't visible, but it's in a high traffic area where they're going to be disturbed no matter what. So that's an option for helping with outreach. And another part of Loon Rangers will be an outreach program that will be providing some training and also giving some presentations that you can use if you want to present to people. And then we'll have some brochures too that you can hand out. And so a big part of this is trying to decrease disturbance to nesting loons by giving people the information they need to be able to tell when they're too close. So how close is too close to a loon? And by reading some of the behaviors of loons when loons are stressed, you can help people to determine if they're just getting way too close and affecting loons' productivity and even their survival. So that's Loon Rangers program. And then the last piece of the project is fish-led free. So this is, as Susan mentioned, something we've been doing for a long time, but it's still a pervasive issue. And so we have 3 parts under this program. One is you can get involved in a tackle exchange where we give you free lead tackle and lead-free tackle, I'm sorry, and then you give that to people in exchange for their old lead tackle. We can put up lead collection bins, lead tackle and fishing line collection bins, so that we can be collecting anything from people who are out on boat ramps. And then there is, the last piece is the Maine lead tackle buyback program. So there are some retailers who have signed up with us, and we have several partners. We have the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife and Maine Outdoor Heritage Fund, the Maine Sportsmen, and then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service through the funding in this program, to pair up with retailers and offer vouchers. So when people turn in an ounce or more of lead tackle at a participating store, they get a $10 voucher to buy lead-free tackle. And right now we have Indian Hill Trading Post at Moosehead Lake. We have Dag's Bait Shop in Auburn, Backwoods Bait and Tackle in Chesterville. And then at least once or twice a year, the Kittery Trading Post puts on an event at September Fest, and then they'll have a winter event too, where they'll be collecting tackle and giving out vouchers for free tackle. So that's all the different ways that you can get involved in the program. So if you think that a raft might be right for your lake, or you really want more information about Loon Rangers and Fish Lead Free, we have contact information here on this slide for all the various partners that you can sign up with. Penobscot Nation is not looking for volunteers, but the other three organizations are. So please, if you want to work with any of us, get in touch. We also have a raft information webinar that we're going to be putting on to help give more information specifically about rafts. So this one will repeat some of what we went over today about determining if a raft is the right fit for your lake, but then it'll go into how do you select a site, and how do you build the raft, how do you place it, maintenance and monitoring. And so those will be happening on March 15th, March 24th, and then we will be recording it too and making it available online. So if you would like to register for one of those, we hope you'll join us. And that's at lakes.me/loons. Okay, and we might want to leave that one up later, but yeah, then that's, I think now we're pretty much ready for questions, but I might go back to that other slide and just leave that one up while we answer questions.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah, and if anybody wants to register for those Loon Raft webinars, the links are on there. They're just towards the bottom of the page. So just page down, and we'll be adding more to that in the coming weeks. There's some volunteer training packets and more raft information, and so we'll keep adding. So if you are interested in this project, bookmark that site and check back.
Yeah.
So we made it through, Tracy. It's not even just past 4:45. So we will make it out of here on time. And we do have quite a few questions. I'll just address a couple really quick, which is that if you are, so as Tracy mentioned, the geographic scope of where we're working. So if somebody asked about the Lakes region, and that's really within LEA's service area. So if you are in the Lakes region, then Maggie Welch on this, her contact information is up here. Maggie would be the person to contact for sort of raft floating and monitoring in that area.
And I should clarify too that while we're working on rafts just in those 11 counties, we are doing Fish Lead Free and also the Loon Rangers program statewide. So,
oh yeah, good point.
Get in touch with us about those programs.
Somebody had a question about Franklin County. Would we be able to go up that far? That wasn't on the list, she thought.
Yeah, that one's has been BRI's area that they're working in. But I think, we're going to be prioritizing these 11 areas, but these 11 counties. But if we get an opportunity and resources to work in other areas, then we'd love to hear from everyone and just, know where there are loons that aren't productive and where rafts might benefit. And if we don't officially, give you a raft and things like that, we might be able to walk you through how to do it on your own.
Yeah, good point. And sorry, the person that wanted to know about the Lakes region was about tackle exchanges. So, so that's those will be statewide, as you mentioned, and it would be great to have some exchanges set up in Portland. So anybody will be able to set those up, and we'll give them all the materials they need. But this year we're more focused more on the rafts, and then Loon Ranger and Fish Led Free will really be coming full. They'll be starting a little bit this summer, but they're really going full bore next summer. Let's see.
I see a few questions here. Do you want me to?
Yeah, you want to jump in with any of them?
Let's see. One said, if we find loon eggs in a nest where flooding occurs, can we relocate the eggs? Because, you know, there are mistakes that are made that in general, we're asking people to leave eggs in place. There has been a case where just last year where eggs were found floating and put back in the nest, and it was successful. But in general, my advice is to leave the eggs and just let it take its course rather than risking. Do you have a different answer, Susan?
No, I was going to say that chances are you wouldn't be able, by the time you got to them and got them out of the water, your chances of saving them and being able to hatch them, like even at a rehabber, is pretty low.
Yeah. Now, is there evidence that eagles nesting on a lake discourage loons from nesting?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't think so. You know, the history of eagles, as you know, is that they've made a huge comeback in the last 50 years. So certainly loons got used to not having eagles around for many decades, and they are definitely adapting to them coming back. So there's a lot of worry and concern about eagle predation. My personal take on it is that, as I mentioned, loons and eagles overlap throughout their range all across Canada. Loons manage to make it on lakes with eagles. They do have to learn what to do, though, as that slide show, that picture with the eagle landing at the nest. I mean, loons have to be vigilant, they have to be protective, and you know, and loons take a long time to breed. They don't breed until they're about on average 5 to 7 or even 11. I think there's been documentation of an 11-year-old loon breeding for the first time. So it takes them a long time to breed successfully. And so those are the things they have to learn. But there were a couple questions about the slideshow. So we'll send you out, anyone who attended or registered, we'll send out a recording of this webinar, and then it's also available on our website. So we'll send that information out to you. So please share it with anybody who you know who would be interested. There's a question, Tracy, did you see this one? Cindy Ripley asked, we talked about water levels. A lot of lakes and ponds control their water levels with dams in the spring. Is there any evidence of this practice being harmful to loons, and are there any recommendations to ponds and lakes going forward?
Right, yeah, so they can end up flooding nests or stranding depending on how the lake is managed. So there is a threat to nesting loons from lake management. And I've been talking to a lot of different lakes that have been keeping their lake levels high for recreational reasons, and where they hadn't been high in the past. And so there are loons on a number of lakes that are trying to find new nesting sites, and they'll try out a site and then they'll fail. And then they'll try another one. And so that is a case where a raft might be your answer. And rafts have been really successful on lakes where the water level management has been a problem. So that would be an option going forward. You can also try to, work with the management, depending on what the goals are for water management, to see if there are options for getting lake levels to a point where there's the natural nesting habitat is available again.
Yeah, and I would say for and also just so people know, on the bigger dammed lakes in Maine, the power generating dams, with not what this person's referring to, I'm sure, but just so people know that there have been loon platforms floated on those lakes for decades as a mitigation measure to the changing water levels.
Yep.
That happen when you're generating power. Let's see, there are some questions. It's a little challenging. There's a bunch of questions in the chat, which is fine, but it's a little harder to, I had my eye on the Q&A box, but let me see.
Well, there is one about how do we order the signs, and
oh yeah.
Yeah, so that would be, so if you're going for the yellow signs, anyone can get those. Just get in touch with, on this slide right here, Hannah Young at conserve@maineaudubon.org, and we can get you a sign. If you're going for the nesting signs, then we'll want to talk to you first. So give us a call for that reason as well. And then we can go through to find out if it's really a good place to put that sign.
Yeah, and somebody mentioned too that if there should be a reduced wake note on that, look out for loon signs, and they haven't been updated in a while, so that's something to think about.
Yeah, that is a great, yeah, because it is becoming an increasing problem. So.
Yep. So somebody asked, this is a good question, that somebody lives on Clemens Pond and they haven't pulled their raft out in the fall, they leave it in the wintertime. And she said, other than risk of winter damage, is there a compelling reason to pull out a raft every winter?
No, it really is ice damage, the reason. So it depends what kind of raft you're using. Some of the more traditional ones, the cedar log rafts, can be pretty hardy. So places like in Vermont, they often will leave them in, and most of them do pretty well. They do find that, some get destroyed. Other places pull them out every year. And it does help to bring them out for waterlogging. That's another consideration, that having them soaking all year round, can make them a lot heavier. So then you can be dealing with flotation issues, but it is possible to leave them in. So.
Yeah. Somebody asked about lake size limitation. If there's one successful pair, but many other loons present, how much space is needed for another successful pair?
Yeah, so average territory size is 100 acres or hectares, right? Yeah, is that right? Which is hectares or acres?
Acres.
Acres, thanks. Okay, yeah, but but they will go up to 200. So it depends a bit on how much fish is what the fish population is. So if they have enough food, then they'll tend to have smaller territory sizes. If it's a fish poor lake, then you'll end up having larger sizes. So that really you want to try to observe the loons and watch where they tend to be interacting more often. So that might indicate a boundary. It's tricky to determine where the boundaries are, but over time you can start to get a sense of where a pair really spends its time.
Yeah, somebody asked about that. Speaking of like observing behavior, somebody asked about that brochure with the relaxed, stressed, the 3 columns, and that'll be ready soon.
It's almost printed. We got the mock-up for the final version today. So
yeah, so for anybody who wants some of those, contact probably Hannah Young, her contact there, conserve@maineaudubon.org, and she can get you those. I think those will be great, outside of this project too. Just I think people will find those helpful to share with their friends and neighbors. Somebody asked about screening for suitable lakes, and I'll just say really, or you can answer if you want, Tracy.
Oh, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, it was a very, Maine Audubon has, 35 plus years of loon count data. And so Tracy really looked at the last 5 years and looked at how many chicks have been produced, roughly what was chick production like over the last 5 years. And then, what was the other criteria? I said I'd answer it. Now I forgot the other. There were 2 criteria.
Well, then we did just look at overall productivity as far as we could tell from the loon count data. So that is like one shot in time. You don't know if there was a chick hatched before the loon count and it was taken, so you didn't find out about that. And you don't know if there was a late nest hatching and so you'd have a chick later. But just based on that loon count, one point in time, whether there was an average, whether the productivity, the number of chicks per pair was around normal, or if it was low.
Yeah, so that it was an initial screening. So there's probably lakes on that list that if a group steps up and wants to put the Raft on, I think you walked through this a little bit, but you know, there's a lot of vetting to be done on all of those lakes. So if you're on a lake that wasn't on that list, you know, get in touch with one of us, and you know, especially if you have additional information to share, you know, we could definitely be adding lakes to that priority list as well.
Yeah, and we're going, you know, with a lot more than just the loon data. So it really, before we're putting a raft out on a lake, we're really taking the time to make sure we have enough information that we can gather from people on the lake to say, you know, what the history was of the, you know, at least the last 3 years, if not the last 5 years of chick hatching success, and whether those chicks then made it off the lake, or at least to 6 weeks of age, when, and that number is just when they're likely to be able to survive, but that's not always the case. Yeah. So that was just an initial screening with what we had. We're not like other lakes, other states where they've been able to, with small numbers of lakes, track the productivity over time. This project really is our opportunity in Maine to start growing our information and knowledge about productivity on different lakes. And so it's really it's a nice opportunity to start catching up to the other states in terms of what we know about productivity.
I'll just answer a couple more questions really quickly, and then I think we'll end this. We do have all your questions. For some of the people asked some really specific questions, we will keep all the questions and get back to you with some answers shortly, not tomorrow, but within the next week. And some people suggested some really good resources, like LPC in New Hampshire has some really good videos and photos of loon behavior. So we'll try to build up that lakes.me/loons page with more resources. We are working with lots of watershed organizations. So somebody asked about 30 Mile River Watershed. We're actually have a meeting tomorrow. All the lake groups are meeting tomorrow, and I'm going to give a little spiel on this project. So you know, if you have a connection to a watershed organization or a lake association, you know, we love to work with everybody. So, and I think with that, I think we'll call it a night. Thank you all so much for coming. I think this is our record. I think our high was 168 people on the call, so on the webinar. So that was really exciting. It's always good to start with an exciting program like this, featuring loons, because we know people love loons. So we're really looking forward to this project, and we're hopefully working with some of you. And thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks, Tracy, for putting this all together.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and we hope to hear from all of you. So
keep in touch.
Yeah, keep in touch.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Bye, everyone.